I'm Ethan, I'm 30 years old, and my parents kicked me out, stole my grandfather's entire inheritance, and left him to rot in a secret nursing home. Before I tell you how I uncovered a brilliant, hidden trap that brought their entire world crashing down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories can reach. It started, as so many betrayals do, with a simple phone call. The name Mom flashed on my screen, and an involuntary knot of ice formed in my stomach. For 6 agonizing months, that screen had been dark. 6 months of crushing silence since the day the oak front door of my childhood home had slammed shut, a sound that marked the end of my life as I knew it. Since then, my world had shrunk to the 4 walls of a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment across town. It was the kind of place where the walls are so thin you learn your neighbor's schedule, their arguments, and their favorite late-night TV shows. My dream of becoming an architect was packed away in a portfolio under my bed, gathering dust while I worked a mind-numbing data entry job just to keep the lights on. And now, after 182 days of non-existence, she was calling. I let it ring once, twice, a third time. Each chime was a small hammer blow against my composure. I finally answered, forcing my voice into a flat, neutral tone. "Hello, Ethan, darling," she purred, her voice dripping with a thick, syrupy sweetness she usually reserved for impressing members of her garden club. "It's your mother. How have you been?" "I'm fine, Mom," I said, cutting through the pleasantries. "What do you want?" "Oh, always so direct," she'd sked lightly. "Your father and I were just talking. It's been far too long. We feel just awful about how things were left. We miss you. We were hoping you might come for dinner on Sunday. To, reconcile." The word reconcile felt alien in her mouth. It sounded like a carefully chosen weapon. But another, more urgent thought pushed its way through the fog of my anger. "How's Grandpa Albert?" A pause. It was fractional, a sliver of a second, but on the silent wire between us, it was as loud as a gunshot. "Oh, he's fine, dear. Just fine. Keeping busy." "That's strange," I pressed, the knot in my stomach tightening into a cold, hard fist. "I've been calling his landline for weeks. Left a dozen messages. He hasn't picked up." "Oh, you know your grandfather and technology," she deflected with a practiced, airy laugh. "He probably can't even find the phone. Look, just come for dinner. We can talk about everything then. It's time for this family to heal." Against every screaming instinct in my body, I agreed. Not for her. Not for them. For him. I had to know what was really going on with my grandfather. He was my anchor, the only person in that entire family who had ever looked at me and seen a person, not a disappointment. That Sunday, I walked back into the house I grew up in, and it felt like stepping into enemy territory. My father, James, presided over the head of the dining table, a strained, benevolent smile plastered on his face. My younger brother, Ryan, the eternal golden child, sat opposite me with his equally smug wife, Christine. They were glowing. It was the only word for it. They radiated a triumphant energy, exchanging tiny, knowing glances over their wine glasses when they thought I wasn't looking. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. After a meal choked with stilted, meaningless chatter, my father cleared his throat, signaling the main event. "Ethan, we are so glad you're here. It's time to put the past behind us. To be a family again." He slid a thick, intimidating manila folder across the polished mahogany surface. "As a show of good faith, we just need you to sign a few documents. Just some simple legal formalities to help us simplify the management of the family's assets." My hands felt cold as I opened the folder. It was a dense jungle of legalese, designed to intimidate and confuse. But my eyes, trained to scan blueprints for details, caught the deadliest phrases. Full and irrevocable power of attorney, complete fiduciary control, and the final venomous stinger. Hereby relinquishes all future claims and rights to the estate of Albert Collins. I slowly raised my head. The benevolent masks were gone. My father's eyes were cold and hard. My mother's smile was a thin, predatory slash. Ryan looked bored, as if waiting for a servant to clear the plates. This wasn't a reconciliation. It was an execution. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. I pushed the folder back towards my father. "I'm not signing a damn thing." The shock on their faces was immediate and profound. They hadn't expected me to refuse. They had expected the broken, desperate son to crawl back and accept any terms. I stood up, the legs of my chair screeching a protest against the hardwood floor. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "And I promise you, I am going to find out what you've done with my grandfather." I turned and walked out of that house, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. This time, I wasn't the one being cast out. I was the one who had just lit the fuse. The drive back to my apartment was a silent movie of flashing red taillights and blurred street lamps. My mind, however, was deafeningly loud. The cold fury that had propelled me out of that house was now a roaring bonfire. I didn't just feel angry. I felt a profound, tectonic shift inside me. The son who had craved their approval was gone, burned away in the heat of their betrayal. I unlocked the door to my apartment, a place I had seen as a symbol of my failure, and for the first time, it felt like a sanctuary. Command center. I sank onto the lumpy couch, the springs groaning, and let the raw memories of the last 6 months surface, not to wallow in them, but to examine them like a detective examining evidence. The final explosion had been building for years, a long, slow-motion demolition of my self-worth. It culminated on a Tuesday afternoon. The catalyst was an official-looking letter from my university's financial aid office. It was a final warning. My tuition for the semester was overdue. A hold had been placed on my account. I was effectively unenrolled. I knew exactly where the money was supposed to have come from. My grandfather had started my college fund when I was born. He was a history teacher, not a wealthy man, but he was disciplined. Every month for 18 years he had put money aside. An education, Ethan, he told me when he gave me the account information, is a fortress. No one can ever take it from you. He was wrong. I stormed home from my part-time job at the campus library and found my parents in the kitchen. My mother was arranging flowers. My father was reading the Wall Street Journal. "My tuition hasn't been paid," I said, my voice trembling as I threw the letter on the granite countertop. "The money from Grandpa's fund. It's gone." My mother didn't even look up from her roses. "Don't be so dramatic, Ethan. It's not gone. It's been reinvested." "Reinvested where?" I demanded. "Ryan has a wonderful new business opportunity," my father said from behind his newspaper. "A curated subscription box for artisanal dog treats. It has huge potential. We needed to show investors we had skin in the game." I stared at them, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity. "You took my college money? For Ryan's dog biscuit business?" "It's family money, Ethan," my father said, finally lowering the paper. His eyes were cold, dismissive. "It goes where it can do the most good. Ryan is an entrepreneur. He's building an asset for this family's future. What do you contribute? You sit in a library all day and draw pictures of buildings that will never exist. It's a hobby." He waved a hand dismissively towards my room, where my meticulously crafted model of a sustainable, low-income housing project sat on my desk. That model was my passion, the culmination of a year's work. To him, it was a child's plaything. "That hobby is my degree," I shouted, my voice finally breaking. "The one you're stealing from me. The one Grandpa wanted me to have." That was my mistake. Mentioning my grandfather touched a nerve. My father stood up, his face contorted with rage. "Don't you dare bring him into this. You are an ungrateful, selfish boy. All you do is take. Ryan gives back." He pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. "If you can't support this family, you don't deserve to be in it. Get out." I had stood there, stunned into silence. I looked at my mother. She just continued to snip the stems of her roses, her face a blank mask of indifference. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. In that moment, I realized I was utterly, completely alone. So I packed. I took my books, my portfolio, my models. I walked out without a word. The silence from them had started that day. For 6 months, I had interpreted that silence as their victory, my punishment. Now, sitting in my apartment, I saw it for what it was, the quiet, methodical cover-up of a much larger crime. My new life was a daily grind. I found the data entry job through a temp agency. The work was soul-crushing. I would sit in a gray cubicle for 8 hours a day, transferring numbers from one spreadsheet to another. My architect's mind, trained to see systems and structures and beauty, was being forced to perform a task a simple algorithm could do. Sometimes, I'd find my hands sketching floor plans on a stray notepad, a reflex from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. My boss, a perpetually stressed man named Henderson, would walk by and I'd quickly cover it up, ashamed. The evenings were the worst. Loneliness was a physical presence in my small apartment. I'd eat cheap pasta and stare at the portfolio under my bed. Opening it felt too painful. It was a reminder of the future that had been stolen. To torture myself, I'd scroll through social media. It was a window into the world my family was living in, a world funded by my stolen future. There was Ryan, grinning from the driver's seat of a brand new, metallic gray BMW 5 Series. The leather seats looked soft and buttery. The caption was a masterpiece of oblivious arrogance. Decided to treat myself. Hard work pays off. Hashtag blessed, hashtag entrepreneur life. I looked at my own 15-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot. The one with the dented fender and the check engine light that never turned off. Then there were the photos from their trip to Italy. My mother and father, posing in front of the Trevi fountain. Ryan and Christine, clinking glasses of Prosecco on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the Amalfi Coast. Living the absolute dream, the caption crowed. I was living on a diet of ramen and despair, and they were living the dream. My phone buzzed, startling me out of my bitter reverie. It was a text from Mark, my only real friend. We'd been inseparable since we'd bonded over our shared love of sci-fi movies in 9th grade biology. Outlaws update? He'd texted. Called him. His voice, calm and logical, was the antidote to the chaos swirling in my head. I recounted the entire dinner, every fake smile, every loaded word, culminating in the legal documents. Power of attorney and relinquishing claims to an estate? Mark's voice was sharp, cutting through my emotional turmoil. Ethan, this is way beyond a family squabble. This is a hostile takeover. They're not just trying to cut you out. They're trying to legally erase you. And the fact that they won't tell you where your grandpa is, that's the reddest flag I've ever seen. I know, I said, my voice hoarse. I feel like I'm losing my mind, Mark. They make me feel like I'm the crazy one, that I'm paranoid. No, you are not crazy, he said with fierce loyalty. You are being systematically gaslit. They're trying to make you doubt your own reality so they can get away with it. We need a plan. What's the next concrete step? I have to find him, I repeated, the thought becoming a mantra. That's all that matters. The next morning, I called in sick to my soul-crushing job. I drove straight to my grandfather's house in the quiet suburb of Maple Creek. The place looked even worse in the daylight. A fine layer of dust covered the windows, and the previously neat rose bushes were running wild. It was a house in mourning. As I stood on the sidewalk, just staring, the front door of the house next door opened. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, white-haired woman who had known me since I was in diapers, came out to get her mail. Her face lit up when she saw me. Ethan, dear, what a surprise. I haven't seen you in ages. Hi, Mrs. Henderson, I said, walking over. I've been away. I'm trying to get in touch with Grandpa, but he's not answering his phone. Her kindly face clouded with concern. Oh, the poor dear. I'm so sorry. I assumed you knew. Knew what? My stomach did a slow, cold flip. Well, your parents came by in a big hurry a few months back. They said Albert had a nasty fall and that his memory was starting to go. They said they'd found a wonderful place for him, a special facility where he could get round-the-clock care. It broke my heart to see him go. He looked so confused. Memory? I repeated, the word tasting like poison. My grandfather had a mind like a steel trap. He could recite the succession of Roman emperors. Did they say where? The name of the place. She shook her head, her brow furrowed in thought. No, dear, they were very vague. Just that it was the best and very exclusive. Your mother said they didn't want him to have too many visitors at first, to let him get settled. I thought it was odd, but she can be very persuasive. Persuasive. That was one word for it. I spent the rest of the day in a frantic, fruitless search. I called every hospital, every rehab center, every memory care facility I could find online within a 100-mile radius. The answer was always polite, professional, and impenetrable. I'm sorry, sir. We have no patient registered under that name. It was like searching for a ghost. That evening, I drove to Mark's place. His apartment, with its glowing monitors and ordered calm, felt like a war room. I paced back and forth as I laid out the new information. They're lying about his memory. They're isolating him. They've hidden him somewhere, Mark. Mark listened intently, his fingers flying across a keyboard, building a digital map of my problem. When I finished, he swiveled in his chair, his expression grim. Okay, so they're smart, he said. They're not using his name. They're using legal guardianship to build a wall around him. Direct assault is impossible. So we go around the wall. We follow the money. He brought up a complex-looking program on his main screen. Your parents are arrogant, Ethan. Arrogance leads to sloppiness. They think they've covered their tracks, but no one covers everything. They have to be paying this exclusive facility, and a place like that costs a fortune. They're moving money around. I just need to find the stream. He looked at me. This is legally questionable. I'd be accessing private financial data. But this feels like an extraordinary circumstance. I met his gaze. Do it? I said, my voice flat and hard. Burn the whole thing to the ground if you have to. For 3 days, the silence was agonizing. I went to work. I stared at spreadsheets. Numbers swam before my eyes. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. I was living on a knife's edge of hope and terror. On the third night, at 11:17 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mark. Eureka, he said, and I could hear the exhaustion and triumph in his voice. They're slick, I'll give them that. They funneled the payments through a holding company set up by their lawyer, David. It's designed to be a dead end. But David isn't as smart as he thinks he is. He used a weak password protocol on his server. What did you find, Mark? I asked, my entire body tense. A recurring monthly payment. A big one. $5,450 to be exact. It's wired to a place called Oakwood Meadows Premier Care. I did some digging. It's a private, long-term luxury care facility, marketed as a resort-style living experience for our most distinguished seniors. And Ethan. It's a 90-minute drive north of the city, tucked away in the middle of the woods. Luxury. The word was obscene. They were paying my yearly salary every 2 months to keep him prisoner. And I found something else, Mark said, his voice dropping ominously. I cross-referenced the dates with their social media posts. The very first payment to Oakwood Meadows was wired on a Monday. The Friday before that. That was the day Ryan and Christine posted their first picture from Rome. The sequence was undeniable. The theft, the vacation, the imprisonment. It was a neat, tidy, monstrous timeline. I'm going there, Mark, I said, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. I'm going right now. Ethan, wait, he urged. Think this through. They'll be expecting you. They'll have instructions. I don't care, I said, my hand on the doorknob. The fear was gone, replaced by a singular, clarifying purpose. The hiding ends tonight. The 90-minute drive north was a journey into a different kind of darkness. The familiar glow of the city skyline shrank in my rearview mirror, replaced by the deep, unnerving black of country roads flanked by dense, silent forests. My headlights cut a lonely tunnel through the night. My mind was eerily calm, the frantic energy having coalesced into a cold, hard point of focus. Every mile that passed was a mile closer to the truth. I replayed my grandfather's voice in my head, the way he would sound when he was telling a story from history. The key to any siege, Ethan, he'd once told me while we were building a model of a medieval castle, is to find the weak point in the wall. There's always one. I was driving towards the fortress where they had imprisoned him, and I was going to find that weak point. Oakwood Meadows emerged from the darkness suddenly. A discreetly lit sign pointed down a long, winding driveway. The place was a sprawling compound of modern architecture and manicured nature, looking more like a corporate retreat or a luxury spa than a place for the elderly and infirm. It was designed to assuage guilt, a beautiful facade to hide an ugly reality. The sight of it filled me with a profound and visceral disgust. I parked my dusty Civic in the visitor's lot, a humble ship in a sea of gleaming German luxury cars. The lobby was even more impressive and soulless up close. It was a vast, two-story atrium with a trickling water feature, expensive abstract art on the walls, and the faint, cloying scent of potpourri mixed with industrial-grade cleaner. It was the smell of sanitized decay. Behind a large, imposing mahogany desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been sculpted from ice. Her blonde hair was arranged in a perfect, immovable helmet. Her name tag, pinned to a crisp blazer, read, Cynthia, Facility Director. She surveyed me with an expression of mild disapproval, her eyes flicking over my simple jacket and jeans. "May I help you?" she inquired, her voice smooth and cool. "Yes," I said, keeping my own voice level. "I'm here to see Albert Collins. I'm his grandson, Ethan." The polite, professional mask didn't even flicker. She tapped a few keys on her computer, her long, manicured nails clicking softly. "One moment, please." Her eyes scanned the screen. "Ah, yes, Mr. Collins. I'm afraid he is not accepting any visitors at this time." "I'm sorry, what do you mean by that? Is he ill? Has something happened?" "Mr. Collins is resting comfortably," she recited, the words clearly part of a script. "As per the explicit instructions of his legal guardian and primary family contact, Mr. James Collins, he is not to be disturbed. This is for his own peace and tranquility during his adjustment period." "His adjustment period has been 4 months. I shot back, my control slipping. "I am his grandson. I have a right to see him." "Actually, you don't," she said, her voice taking on a sharper, colder edge. The politeness was gone, replaced by the unyielding authority of a bureaucrat. "His legal guardian has determined the visitation policy. It's for his own protection. We have a duty of care to our residents, which includes protecting them from potentially disruptive influences." Disruptive influence. Me. I was the threat. The sheer, twisted audacity of it stole my breath. "If you have any further concerns," she continued, her voice a clear dismissal, "you will have to address them with Mr. James Collins. Now, I must ask you to leave the premises." She placed a hand on the telephone on her desk, a silent threat to call security. There was nothing more I could do. I was stonewalled. I turned and walked out, the automatic glass doors sighing shut behind me, sealing my grandfather inside. I slumped into the driver's seat of my car, the engine cold, and stared at the brightly lit fortress. Despair, cold and heavy, settled over me. They had built their walls high and strong. I had no legal standing, no way in. I was powerless. I sat there for what must have been an hour, watching the sky bleed from deep indigo to black. The evening shift change began. Staff members in scrubs and uniforms streamed out of a side door, their faces weary as they walked to the employee lot. One of them, a young woman with a kind face and tired eyes, walked past my car. She glanced in, a fleeting, casual look, but then she did a double-take. Our eyes met for a split second. I saw a flicker of something, recognition, sympathy. Before I could process it, she looked away and hurried to her car. A desperate idea, a long shot, sparked in my mind. I got out of my car and walked towards the employee lot, my heart starting to pound again. I caught up to her just as she was unlocking her car door. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. She jumped, startled, her hand flying to her chest. She looked at me with wide, wary eyes. Her name tag read, Emily. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said quickly, holding my hands up. "My name is Ethan Collins. I was in the lobby earlier. I was trying to see my grandfather, Albert." Her expression softened from fear to weary understanding. "I know. I was at the nurse's station. I heard Cynthia. I'm really sorry. Is he okay?" The question felt impossibly heavy. She said he needed peace and tranquility. What does that mean? Emily hesitated, her gaze darting back towards the main building as if checking for spies. "It means he's isolated," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "That's what it means. He's physically fine for a man his age, but he's fading. He doesn't talk much. He just sits by his window. He asks about his grandson sometimes, though." The words hit me like a physical blow. "He asks about me?" She nodded. "He told me once you were going to be a famous architect, that you were designing a special library." Tears I didn't know were there stung my eyes. He remembered my senior project. The project my own father had called a foolish hobby. "They're lying to him, aren't they?" My voice was thick with emotion. "They're telling him I don't want to see him." Emily's jaw tightened, and a flash of anger crossed her face. I saw an internal battle play out in her expression, the cautious employee versus the compassionate human being. "Listen," she said, her voice low and tense. "I could lose my job for even talking to you, my nursing license. The privacy laws are no joke. They could sue me." "I know," I said, my voice pleading. "I would never ask this if I wasn't desperate. I think my family is doing something monstrous. I think they're stealing his inheritance and keeping him locked up until I couldn't finish the sentence. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I scrolled to my favorite picture and held it out to her. It was from a fishing trip years ago, on my 16th birthday. I was a gangly teenager, beaming with pride as I held up a small, pathetic-looking vase. My grandfather stood beside me, his arms slung around my shoulder, his face crinkled in a huge, joyous laugh. He looked vibrant, alive, full of love. Emily stared at the picture on the screen, and I saw her professional resolve crumble. A deep, personal sadness filled her eyes. "My father," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He passed away 2 years ago, in a place like this. Not as fancy, but the same business model. My uncle, his brother, had power of attorney. He told my sister and me that Dad was confused, that he didn't want visitors because he got agitated. We were young, we trusted him. We'd call, and the nurses would just give us the same script. He's resting comfortably." Her voice broke. "When we finally got suspicious and hired a lawyer, it was too late. We got in to see him a week before he died. He was just a shell. My uncle had sold his house and drained every penny from his accounts. He died broke and alone." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I saw your face in that lobby today. I recognized that look of helpless desperation. I saw myself from 3 years ago, and I swore I would never just stand by and let that happen to someone else if I could do something about it." She took a deep, steadying breath, her decision made. She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn wallet. From a hidden pocket, she slipped out a thin plastic ID card. The photo was of a young woman I didn't recognize. "This belonged to a temp nurse," Emily said, pressing the card into my palm. It was cool against my clammy skin. "She quit last week, and management is too cheap to change the access codes more than once a month. The mag strip is still active. It will get you into the residential wing through the east side service entrance. But the doors to the individual rooms are on a different system. I'll have to buzz you in from the nurse's station on my floor." She took a pen from her pocket and scribbled a room number on the back of a receipt. "Room 214, West Wing. I start my rounds in an hour. Get to his floor, stay out of sight of the main hall cameras. They're the ones with the little red lights. Wait in the stairwell at the end of the hall. I'll text you when the floor nurse takes her break. It will be a 10-minute window. That's all I can give you. If anyone finds you, I've never seen you before. We did not have this conversation. Do you understand? I understand, I said, my hand closing around the card, a talisman of hope. Emily, thank you. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, she said, her voice firm with purpose. Just go be there for your grandfather. That's all the thanks I need. She gave me one last, determined look, then turned and walked back towards the bright, cold building, her duty and her conscience now at war. I stood alone in the darkness of the parking lot, the weight of her risk and her trust settling on my shoulders. This was no longer just my fight. It was hers, too. It was for her father and for mine. I waited until the parking lot was empty and the night was still. Then I circled the building. I found the east service entrance, a plain metal door tucked away behind a row of hedges. I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs, and swiped the card. A green light blinked, and the lock clicked open with a sound that was deafening in the silence. I slipped inside into the belly of the beast. The service corridor was a stark contrast to the luxurious lobby. It was narrow, lit by humming fluorescent tubes, and smelled of bleach and floor wax. I moved quickly and silently, my sneakers making no sound on the linoleum. Every distant clang of an elevator, every murmur of a television from a resident's room, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I felt like a spy in a foreign country, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I followed Emily's mental map, navigating the sterile labyrinth until I found the door to the west wing. I eased it open and peered out. The residential hallway was carpeted, the walls adorned with the same kind of bland, inoffensive art as the lobby. It was deserted. I spotted the ominous black domes of the security cameras mounted high on the ceiling in the center of the corridor and flattened myself against the wall, staying in their blind spot as I crept towards the stairwell at the far end. I slipped inside, the heavy fire door closing with a solid, muffled thump. The stairwell was cold concrete and steel, echoing with a faint, low hum from the building's ventilation system. I pulled out my phone. The screen showed 3 bars of service. I leaned against the cool wall, my body thrumming with nervous energy, and waited. Each minute felt like an hour. What if she couldn't do it? What if she got caught? What if this was all for nothing? My mind raced with catastrophic possibilities. Just as I was starting to think it was a lost cause, my phone vibrated in my hand. A text from an unknown number. Floor nurse on break. You have a 10-minute window. Room 214. The door is unlocked now. Go, go, go. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open, scanned the hallway, still empty, and walked with long, purposeful strides to room 214. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob. Turned. The latch was disengaged. I pushed the door open, slipped inside, and closed it softly behind me, my back pressing against the wood. The room was large and impersonal, like a suite in an airport hotel. The furniture was expensive but devoid of character. There were no family photographs on the nightstand, no favorite books, no half-finished crossword puzzles. It was a room for waiting in. And by the large, darkened window, looking out at nothing, sat my grandfather. He was a silhouette against the distant glow of the ground's lighting. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. "Grandpa!" My voice was a choked whisper. He turned his head with a slow, weary motion. His eyes, usually so full of life and sharp intelligence, were dull and clouded over with a fog of resignation. Then they focused on me. The fog began to lift, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. "Ethan?" His voice was a dry, unused rasp. "Ethan, is that really you? Am I dreaming?" I crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to my knees beside his armchair. He reached out and gripped my arm, his fingers surprisingly strong, as if testing to see if I was solid. "I'm here, Grandpa," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm real. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. They told me," he started, his voice cracking with emotion. "They told me you were too busy with your new career, that you were traveling. They said you didn't want to be bothered with a sick old man." "That's a lie," I said, raw anger cutting through my sorrow. "A complete lie. They told me you were fine. They wouldn't tell me where you were. I've been trying to find you for months." The full weight of the betrayal settled on his face, and he sank back into his chair. "I knew it," he breathed. "In my heart, I knew that wasn't my boy. That wasn't the boy I raised." He began to talk, the words spilling out, a torrent of suppressed truth. He told me about the minor stroke, the weeks of difficult recovery. He told me how my parents and their lawyer, David, had descended on him in that state of vulnerability, armed with stacks of documents. "Just to help pay your bills while you get back on your feet, Dad," my father had said. It was the power of attorney. Once they had his signature, the trap was sprung. They had moved him here under the guise of temporary rehabilitation, then cut off his access to the outside world. "My will, Ethan," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, the old fire and fury returning. "It's all in the will. I left everything to you. The house, my savings, my investment portfolio. It was all for you. For your architecture degree, for your future. They knew it. Your father has known for 20 years. They're trying to steal it all. It was worse than I had imagined. A complete, premeditated theft of my life and his legacy. How can I fight them?" I asked, my mind racing. "They have the legal documents." "Henry," he said, his voice urgent. "You have to find Henry Peterson. My old lawyer, my best friend. We were partners in a debate club in college. He's the most honest man I've ever known. He drafted the real will. He witnessed it. He'll have a copy in his files. He'll know what to do. A lifeline. A concrete name. Where is he?" My grandfather's face fell. "That's the difficult part. He retired years ago. He and his wife, Martha, they bought a small farm. Moved away to escape the city smog. Oregon, I think he said. Or was it Washington? Can't be sure. We used to write letters, but since they put me in here..." He gestured helplessly at the impersonal room. My phone buzzed again. "Emily, 2 minutes. Wrap it up." "Don't worry, Grandpa," I said, squeezing his hand, pouring all my conviction into the words. "I don't care if he's in Oregon or Alaska. I will find him. And I swear to you, I will get you out of this place." I left him with a promise and a renewed sense of hope. Sneaking out was even more nerve-wracking than sneaking in, but I made it back to my car, my mind already 1,000 miles away in the Pacific Northwest. The next few days were a masterclass in frustration. Mark and I set up a command center in his apartment. The problem was immense. There were, according to our searches, 147 registered voters named Henry Peterson in Oregon and Washington combined. We started calling. It was a painful process. We spoke to confused wives, annoyed sons, and in one case, a very angry man who threatened to call the police for harassing him. We found 3 Henry Petersons who were lawyers, but they were all too young. We found one who had recently passed away, a fact that sent a bolt of pure panic through me. "This isn't working," I said after 2 days of dead ends, running my hands through my hair in frustration. "It's impossible." "No," Mark said, ever the strategist. "We're using brute force. We need to be smarter. What else do we know about him? Your grandpa said he was his best friend, right? From college?" "Yeah, the debate club." "What college?" "State University, class of '68. I recalled from one of Grandpa's stories. Mark's fingers flew across the keyboard. He pulled up the university's Alumni Association website. He searched the digital archives. A few minutes later, he grunted in triumph. "Okay, found him. Henry Peterson, BA in Political Science, JD from the law school, class of '68. It lists his last known law firm, Peterson, Shaw and Associates, which was acquired in 2012. That's the firm Grandpa mentioned." "Exactly. Now we have a professional trail." Mark started cross-referencing the firm with legal databases and social networking sites for professionals. The trail went cold around the time of his retirement. "Okay, new angle," Mark said, undeterred. "People like this, old-school successful lawyers, they don't just vanish. They do charity work. They sit on boards. They donate money." He started running searches combining Henry's name with keywords like trustee, donor, foundation, charity, in both states. For hours, nothing but dead ends. I was starting to lose hope again. Then, late on the third night, Mark let out a low whistle. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." He pointed at the screen. It was an article from a small-town newspaper in Oregon, the Ashland Daily Chronicle. The article was about a local charity, the Rogue Valley Literacy Project, which donated books to underprivileged kids. And there, in a photo of the board of directors, was a smiling, white-haired man. The caption read, "Board Chairman Henry Peterson." It wasn't just a lead. It was a direct hit. He was involved in a literacy charity. Just like my grandfather. Of course he was. "Book a flight to Medford, Oregon," Mark said, a grin spreading across his face. "It looks like you're going to find your needle." The air in Ashland, Oregon, was clean and crisp, a stark contrast to the smoggy anxiety of my life back home. It was a town of theaters, bookstores, and quiet, tree-lined streets. I took a cab from the small airport, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs, and gave the driver the address Mark had found for the Rogue Valley Literacy Project. It was a small, welcoming office in a converted Victorian house. A friendly woman at the front desk told me that Mr. Peterson wasn't in, but that he was usually at home in the afternoons. She was kind enough to give me his home address, confirming it was the same one Mark had found. 15 minutes later, I was standing on the front porch of a beautiful craftsman-style house, surrounded by a garden overflowing with flowers. I took a deep breath and rang the bell. The man who answered was instantly recognizable from the newspaper photo. He was tall, with a full head of white hair and warm, intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a pleasant baritone. "Mr. Henry Peterson?" I asked, my own voice a little shaky. "The one and only," he said. "Sir, my name is Ethan Collins. I'm Albert Collins' grandson." His face broke into a huge, delighted grin. It was a smile of genuine recognition and affection. "Ethan, good heavens. Your grandfather has shown me pictures of you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. What a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in. What on earth brings you all the way out to Ashland?" His wife, Martha, was just as warm, insisting on making me a cup of tea. As we sat in their sun-drenched living room, surrounded by shelves overflowing with books, the pleasantries soon faded as I began my story. I told him everything. The way I was kicked out, the suspicious dinner and the legal documents, the desperate search for my grandfather, and the final, heartbreaking discovery at Oakwood Meadows. As I spoke, the warmth in Henry's face cooled and hardened into a mask of grim, professional fury. He listened without interruption, his hands steepled before him, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "David Miller," he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "I knew that man was a snake in a suit. I warned Al. When Al told me years ago that your father was insisting they move the family's estate planning to his good friend David, I had a bad feeling. It was too convenient." He shook his head, his anger palpable. "And James and Linda, I knew they spoiled that boy of theirs, but I never imagined they were capable of this level of monstrous, calculated cruelty." He stood up and walked with a determined stride to a heavy oak filing cabinet in the corner of the room. "I'm a cautious man, Ethan. Always have been. When Al signed that new will with David, I asked him for a copy of the old one he had with me. I told him it was for my records. In truth," he said, pulling out a thick, dust-covered folder, "it was for safekeeping, just in case." He placed the folder on the coffee table between us and opened it. My breath caught in my throat. There, in crisp, clear type, was the title, "The Last Will and Testament of Albert Collins." He pushed it towards me. I read the first page, my eyes scanning the clear, unambiguous language. It was all there. The house, the savings accounts, the stock portfolio. Everything was left to me. My beloved grandson, Ethan Michael Collins. It named Henry Peterson as the sole executor of the estate. It was signed in my grandfather's strong, familiar hand and witnessed by Henry and his law partner at the time. It was a legal battleship. "This is it?" I whispered, my hand tracing my grandfather's signature. This is the proof. This is our ammunition, Henry corrected me, his lawyer's mind already spinning out strategies. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Now, listen to me very carefully, Ethan. Your first instinct, your human instinct, will be to take this document, fly home, and throw it in your parents' faces at the dinner table. Do not do that. But, no, he said firmly. That's an emotional confrontation. They will yell, they will lie, they will call you a forger and a lunatic. It will devolve into a chaotic family drama, and in chaos they have the advantage. We don't want drama. We want a clinical, legal checkmate. The logic of his words was undeniable. So what's the move? I asked, ready to follow his lead completely. We don't challenge them in their home, Henry said, a strategic glint in his eye. We force them onto our ground. Tell me, your grandfather started a small charity years ago, didn't he? A literacy fund. The Collins Literacy Fund, I confirmed. It donates books to schools. My parents are on the board. And who else? Henry pressed. Their lawyer, David, I said. A slow, grim smile spread across Henry's face. Oh, that is just perfect. They've built their own gallows. He leaned back. I happen to have a copy of that foundation's original charter and bylaws, as I helped Al draft them. As your grandfather's legally designated heir and the named successor trustee in those bylaws, you have the absolute right to call an emergency meeting of the board. And as board members, they are legally and professionally obligated to attend. The brilliance of it was breathtaking. It was cold. It was corporate. It was an execution disguised as a business meeting. A week later, I found myself in a different world. I was back home, but not in my apartment. I was standing in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom on the 25th floor of a downtown office building that Henry had arranged. I was wearing my only suit, but it felt different now. Felt like armor. Henry, who had flown in that morning, stood beside me, his calm, authoritative presence a silent anchor. They were already there, seated around the long, imposing conference table. My father sat at the head, attempting to project an aura of control. My mother was beside him, her expression a carefully constructed mask of detached curiosity. Ryan was slumped in his chair, scrolling on his phone, the picture of board entitlement. And at the end, looking smug and confident, was their lawyer, David Miller. They looked at me as if I were a curiosity, a mild annoyance that would soon be dealt with. Ethan, my father began, his voice laced with condescending paternalism. You've dragged us all down here. We're all very busy people. What is this little meeting about? I didn't even look at him. I looked at Henry. Henry cleared his throat, and the sound seemed to command the room's attention. He placed a sleek leather folder on the table. This is a formal and legally convened emergency meeting of the board of the Collins Literacy Fund, he announced, his powerful voice filling the room. We are here today at the request of the designated successor trustee, Mr. Ethan Collins. David Miller let out a short, derisive laugh. Successor trustee? That's utterly absurd. James Collins is the current trustee, as designated by the most recent legal documents. Ah, but that's where you are mistaken, Mr. Miller, Henry said smoothly, sliding a document across the table towards him. This is a full and irrevocable power of attorney, legally executed by Albert Collins just yesterday afternoon, granting his complete and total legal authority to his grandson, Ethan Collins. It naturally supersedes any and all previous arrangements, particularly those made under duress or false pretenses. The color drained from David's face. He snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the legal text with frantic speed. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. My mother and father exchanged a nervous, questioning glance. Ryan finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of confusion on his face. I finally spoke, my voice devoid of emotion, as cold and clear as ice. As my first official act as trustee, I am announcing an immediate, independent forensic audit of this foundation's finances, and all personal assets of my grandfather's that have been under its management for the past 5 years. Panic flashed in my father's eyes. That's preposterous. Unnecessary. The books are perfectly in order. And furthermore, I continued, my voice cutting through his protests like a blade, we will be legally contesting the fraudulent will that you and your counsel here had my grandfather sign, which names you as the primary beneficiary of his estate. This was too much for David. He slammed his flat hand on the table. You have absolutely no proof of that outrageous accusation. That will is legal, binding, and has been filed with the state. Are you quite sure about that, David? Henry asked softly, his demeanor calm but his eyes sharp as a hawk's. He pulled another document from his folder. This is a preliminary report from a certified forensic handwriting expert. It concludes that the signature on your version of the will exhibits clear signs of being signed under extreme physical strain and motor impairment. Interestingly, however, Henry paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. It is a perfect forensic match for the signature on the power of attorney my clients had him sign while he was recovering from a documented stroke. David Miller looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. This was my moment. I turned to the large, 80-inch monitor on the wall and clicked a remote. The screen flickered to life, showing Mark's face, clear as day, from his home office. Good afternoon, members of the board, Mark said, his voice cheerful but his eyes all business. He shared his screen, and a complex web of financial data, spreadsheets, and bank logos filled the monitor. I've been asked to present a brief overview of some recent asset flows. His cursor moved with surgical precision. Here, he said, highlighting a line item, we see a withdrawal of $50,000 from one of Mr. Albert Collins' investment accounts. 3 days later, we see a corresponding wire transfer to a BMW dealership for the exact down payment on a 2024 5 Series sedan, registered to Mr. Ryan Collins. Ryan sat bolt upright, his face a sudden mask of slack-jawed horror. And moving on, Mark continued, his cursor dancing across the screen, we have the credit card statements for the 2 weeks following that transaction. We see charges for 2 first-class, round-trip tickets to Rome on Alitalia. We see multiple charges from the Hotel Hassler in Rome, and a significant charge from a Gucci boutique on the Via Condotti. All of these were paid from an account funded exclusively by direct monthly deposits from Albert Collins' retirement pension. Mark looked directly into the webcam, a small, polite smile on his face. It appears that living the dream can be quite expensive, especially when it's on someone else's dime. The room was utterly, profoundly silent, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. The smugness, the arrogance, the entitlement. It had all evaporated, leaving behind the ugly, shriveled core of their greed. My mother's face had crumpled, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the terror in her eyes. My father stared at his trembling hands on the table, his face a pasty, ashen gray. Ryan was looking back and forth between the screen and his parents, the dawning horror of a pampered pawn who finally realizes he's been part of a crime and is just as disposable as the rest. I stood up, the chair making no sound on the thick carpet. The audit begins tomorrow morning. My lawyer, I said with a nod toward Henry, will be in touch with your lawyer. This meeting is adjourned. I turned and walked out of the room, Henry by my side. I didn't look back. There was no need. I had left them in the rubble of the world they had built, buried under the weight of their own lies. The boardroom confrontation wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a controlled demolition. The days that followed were a blur of intense legal action, orchestrated by Henry with the precision of a seasoned field marshal. The silence from my family was absolute and terrified. The noise from the lawyers, however, was a constant, satisfying roar. Henry's firm dispatched a volley of formal letters and subpoenas that landed like targeted airstrikes. My parents and David Miller were legally compelled to turn over years of financial records. A court order, granted on the basis of the evidence we presented, froze their personal and professional assets pending the outcome of the forensic audit. The Collins Literacy Fund was placed under my interim control, its books thrown open to a team of sharp-eyed accountants Henry had hired. The insulated, protected world my parents had so carefully constructed was being systematically and legally dismantled, brick by brick, right before their eyes. My first and most important priority, however, had nothing to do with money. It was about reclaiming a life. I drove back to Oakwood Meadows, but this time, I wasn't a desperate trespasser. I walked through the main doors with Henry at my side, and instead of being met with condescension, I was met with unconcealed panic. I handed the facility director, Cynthia, a legally binding court order, signed by a judge that morning. It demanded the immediate and unconditional release of Albert Collins into the care of his legally appointed guardian and holder of his power of attorney. Me. Cynthia's face, usually a mask of cool professionalism, went through a rapid series of micro-expressions. Shock, disbelief, and finally, raw fear. She read the document twice, her hands trembling slightly. She made a frantic, whispered call to the facility's legal department, her eyes darting towards me as if I might suddenly sprout horns. There were no arguments to be made. The paper was a legal battering ram, and her flimsy institutional walls stood no chance. They brought my grandfather down to the lobby a few minutes later, already packed, his few belongings in a small suitcase. The staff who had been instructed to ignore him now looked on with a mixture of awe and trepidation. When my grandfather saw me standing there, not as a furtive visitor but as his rescuer, his entire posture changed. He stood taller, the fog of resignation completely gone from his eyes, replaced by a look of fierce pride. As we walked towards the exit, I saw Emily, the nurse who had taken such a huge risk for me. She was pretending to adjust a chart on the wall, but her eyes were on us. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of triumph. I met her gaze and nodded back, a silent, profound thank you that conveyed more than words ever could. I made a mental note to have Henry set up an anonymous donation to her favorite charity, a small token for an act of immense courage. Bringing my grandfather home was the real victory. As he stepped out of my car and looked at his own small brick house, he took a deep, shaky breath, as if tasting freedom for the first time in months. He walked up the path and ran a hand along the familiar wood of the front door. "I thought I'd never see this place again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That first night I cooked his favorite meal, simple spaghetti with meatballs, and we ate in comfortable silence in his old kitchen. For the first time in half a year, I felt a sense of peace. The warrior could finally rest, at least for a night." A few days later, back in Ashland, I was in Henry's magnificent, book-lined home office. We were sifting through the mountain of original documents he had kept in his files, cross-referencing them with the new information the auditors were uncovering. Henry tapped a thick, leather-bound document, the original charter for the Collins Literacy Fund that he and my grandfather had drafted over 20 years ago. "I told you your grandfather was a brilliant man, Ethan," Henry said, a deep satisfaction in his voice. "He wasn't just a kind soul. He was a student of history, and history is filled with stories of greed and betrayal. He learned from them. He built a better mousetrap." He turned to a specific section, Article 7, Section B, titled Fiduciary Misconduct Clause. The legal language was dense, but Henry translated it for me. It stipulated that a significant portion of my grandfather's personal fortune, a carefully managed, multimillion-dollar investment portfolio, was legally tied to the foundation. It was to be managed by the Board of Trustees. However, and this was the genius of it, the fail-safe clause stated that in the event of legally proven fiduciary misconduct, gross negligence or embezzlement by the seated trustees, all control and ownership of the entire portfolio would immediately and irrevocably be transferred, not to a new board, not to a court-appointed receiver, but directly to the named successor trustee me. I read the clause over and over, the sheer, cold-blooded brilliance of it sinking in. It wasn't a secret account he had hidden. It was a trap laid in plain sight. My parents and David had seen the foundation's operating budget and my grandfather's savings as the grand prize. They were so blinded by their greed for the thousands that they never saw the millions lying in wait behind it. They thought they were robbing a house, not realizing their actions would trip a wire that would hand me the keys to the entire fortress. "They didn't just give you back your inheritance, Ethan," Henry said. leaning back in his chair with a deep, booming laugh. Their greed, their utter, predictable greed, just made you a very, very wealthy man. Your grandfather didn't just trust you with his money. He trusted you with his justice. The scale of it was dizzying. This wasn't just about getting my life back. It was about being handed a legacy so immense it came with a profound weight of responsibility. My phone rang late one night. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. It was my father. His voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its arrogance and authority, leaving only a pathetic, whining desperation. It was a rambling, incoherent torrent of words. Threats one moment, pathetic begging the next. He blamed me for destroying the family. He blamed my mother for her ambition. He blamed David for his bad advice. He talked about blood, about loyalty, about how I could still make this right if I just called off the lawyers. I listened to it all calmly, without saying a word. I let him empty himself of all his venom and self-pity. When he finally sputtered into silence, waiting for a response, a plea, anything, I quietly pressed the red icon on the screen and ended the call. Then I blocked the number. The last, frayed thread had been cut. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just the quiet, clean emptiness of a space that had once been filled with pain, now ready for something new to be built in its place. The passage of a year can feel like a lifetime. The Ethan who existed a year prior, the one living in a cramped apartment, drowning in despair and data entry, was a ghost, a story I could tell about someone else. My new reality was built on a foundation of purpose and hard work, a life I was consciously designing every single day. I was back in architecture school, a place that had once been a source of pain and lost dreams. Now it was my sanctuary. I wasn't just a student anymore. I was one of the most engaged and promising in my cohort. The theoretical knowledge was now backed by a profound, real-world understanding of what a home, a foundation, truly meant. My thesis project, the culmination of my master's degree, wasn't just a grade. It was a tribute. I had poured my energy into designing a state-of-the-art, universally accessible wing for my grandfather's house. I obsessed over every detail. The width of the doorways to accommodate a wheelchair he didn't even need yet, the non-slip tiles in the walk-in shower, the precise angle of the large windows in the sunroom to catch the maximum amount of morning light. The construction process was a healing ritual. The scent of fresh-cut lumber replaced the stale air of my old apartment. The rhythmic sound of hammers and saws was the music of creation, drowning out the lingering echoes of my family's destructive words. My grandfather would spend hours sitting in a lawn chair in the garden, a thermos of tea by his side, watching the structure take shape. He'd offer unsolicited, and usually very good, advice to the builders. He was no longer a resident or a patient. He was the master of his domain once again, his spirit as vibrant as the new flowers we'd planted together. News of my former family trickled in through the grapevine, usually via Mark, who took a certain grim pleasure in delivering the updates. The legal battle had ended in a complete and total surrender on their part. Faced with irrefutable proof of criminal fraud, they had settled out of court, signing away every last claim to avoid facing a grand jury. My father and mother had been forced to sell their large, ostentatious house to cover their legal fees and the amount they had to repay the foundation. They were now living in a small, rented condo on the other side of the state, their social circle having evaporated overnight. They were pariahs, their story a cautionary tale whispered at the country clubs they could no longer afford. Ryan's downfall was, in many ways, more complete. His blessed life had imploded. Christine, seeing that the money train had not only stopped but spectacularly derailed, had filed for the most acrimonious divorce imaginable. She had a sharp lawyer who painted Ryan as a co-conspirator in the fraud, ensuring she walked away with the lion's share of their marital assets, including the infamous BMW. Ryan, the golden child who had never held a real job, was now working the 3 a.m. shift at an Amazon fulfillment center, his entrepreneurial spirit reduced to scanning barcodes and lifting boxes. I felt a brief, fleeting pang of something that might have been pity, but it passed. He was the architect of his own demise. I was just the building inspector who had condemned the faulty structure. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was at a local coffee shop, sketching ideas for the library project in my notebook. The aroma of roasted coffee beans and the quiet hum of conversation was a peaceful backdrop to my work. Ethan? Oh my God! Is that really you? I looked up from my sketchbook. It was Lucy, my ex-girlfriend, the one who had delivered the final blow to my self-esteem a month after I'd been kicked out. I remembered her words perfectly, delivered with a cool, clinical precision. I just think we're on different paths, Ethan. I need someone with more ambition, a clearer trajectory for their future. Now, she stood before me, a practiced, dazzling smile on her face. Her eyes did a quick, almost imperceptible scan, taking in my well-fitting jacket, the expensive-looking watch on my wrist, and the confident, relaxed way I held myself. "You look amazing," she said, her voice a little breathless. "Just incredible. I heard you went back to school to finish your degree. That's so wonderful. I always knew you had it in you. I always believed in you." The lie was so bald, so transparent, it was almost impressive. The old Ethan, the broken Ethan, would have felt a surge of bitter triumph. He would have wanted to rub her nose in it, to make her feel the sting of her own shallow hypocrisy. But the man sitting at the table now just felt tired. Tired of the games, tired of the phoniness. I offered her a small, polite smile. "Hi, Lucy. It's good to see you. I hope you're doing well." I am, she said, lingering by the table, clearly expecting an invitation to sit. "Things are great, but I was just thinking, maybe we could, properly catch up sometime? I'd love to hear all about what you've been up to. We could get dinner." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the girl who broke my heart. I saw a person driven by a deep, anxious insecurity, constantly scanning the horizon for the next best opportunity. I felt a flicker of pity for her, too. "That's a nice offer, Lucy, but I'm afraid I can't," I said, my tone gentle but unmistakably final. "My thesis is taking up all my time, and my grandfather needs me. My life is very full right now." I didn't say there was no room for her. I just stated the fact that the space was already occupied by things that mattered. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She recovered quickly, but the disappointment was visible in her eyes. "Oh, of course. I understand. Well, it was great seeing you." "You too," I said, and then I turned back to my sketchbook, my focus returning to the clean, precise lines of a building. It was a clear, polite, and absolute dismissal. I felt her presence linger for another moment, a silent, hopeful pause, before she finally turned and walked out of the coffee shop. I didn't watch her go. I was too busy designing a staircase. I had finally learned that the only person's approval I truly needed was my own. It was a lesson my grandfather had tried to teach me for years, a lesson I had to learn in the crucible of betrayal and loss. And now, at last, it was a part of my own foundation, solid and unshakable. Late one evening, I was showing my grandfather the finished blueprints for the library. He traced the lines of the roof with a gnarled finger, his old teacher's eyes taking in every detail. "You know," he said quietly, his voice filled with a deep, resonant emotion, "when your grandmother and I bought this house, we used every penny we had saved from our first 10 years of teaching. We painted every wall, planted every tree. It was our foundation, the place from which everything else grew." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with a love so pure and unconditional it felt like a physical warmth. "To see you not just living in it, but making it stronger, making it your own, to see you take the rubble of what they did and build something so beautiful, is more than I ever could have hoped for, Ethan. You've made an old man very, very proud." In that quiet moment, I understood the true nature of the inheritance. It wasn't the money, the stocks, or the house. It was the legacy of a good man's values, the strength of the foundation he had laid, and the precious, unshakable belief he had in me, even when I had lost it in myself. The lights were bright, but not glaring. The room was filled, not with hostile board members, but with the quiet, hopeful energy of community leaders, journalists, and a crowd of young, eager faces. I stood at a sleek, modern podium, not in a soulless boardroom, but in the brand-new, beautifully designed community wing of the West City Public Library, a project I had helped oversee from concept to completion. A year ago, I was a ghost in a cubicle farm. Tonight, I was the chairman of the revitalized and richly endowed Albert Collins Foundation. My speech wasn't about my past. It wasn't a story of revenge or a cautionary tale of family betrayal. Their story was over, a footnote in a much larger narrative. My story, our story, was about what comes next. I spoke about my grandfather not as a victim, but as the inspiration he had always been. I spoke about his unwavering belief that knowledge, empathy, and history were the tools we use to build a better world. He believed that a good education was a fortress, I told the crowd. But he also knew that before you can build a fortress, you must first have solid ground to build it on. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, young people from local colleges and community shelters that we had invited. That is why the Albert Collins Foundation is expanding its mission, I announced, my voice clear and strong, carrying through the silent room. Beyond literacy, we will now focus on providing that solid ground. Today, I am proud to announce the launch of the Second Start Fund. This fund, I explained, my voice filled with the passion of my new purpose, is designed to be a lifeline. It will provide emergency housing grants, tuition scholarships, and pro bono legal aid to young adults between the ages of 18 and 25 who have been financially abandoned, disowned, or abused by their families. It is a next-generation college fund for a generation so often told their dreams are a burden. It is for every young person who has been made to feel that they are not a worthy investment. A murmur of approval, of genuine excitement, rippled through the room. We cannot choose the family we are born into, I concluded. But we can choose to build a new family, a community of support that believes in our potential. We can be the foundation for each other. As the applause began, my eyes scanned the front row, and there he was, my grandfather, sitting between a beaming Henry and a ridiculously proud Mark. He wasn't just smiling. His eyes were shining with tears of pure joy. He looked at me. The grandson he had taught to fish, the boy he had defended, the man he had trusted with his entire legacy, and he gave me a slow, deliberate, approving nod. It was more valuable than any inheritance. It was a benediction. It was the final, perfect seal on a promise made and kept. I stepped away from the podium, the applause washing over me. I had finally understood. I hadn't just fought to reclaim a house or a bank account. I had fought to reclaim my future. And in winning that fight, I had been given the extraordinary privilege not just to rebuild my own life, but to hand others the tools and the blueprints to start building theirs. The foundation was secure. The work was just beginning. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reached you in some meaningful way. It was a long and painful journey, but it taught me that sometimes the greatest strength is found not in forgetting the past, but in building a better future from its ruins. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.